Welcome to this BRCGS webinar on food safety culture. I'm John Figgins. I'm the Technical Specialist for Food at BRCGS, and presenting with me today is David Braxton, Technical Director at BRCGS. The aim of today's webinar is to go through the subject of food safety culture, which has been talked about a lot in the last few years and has been added to issue 8 of the standard. We'll look at what culture actually means and then have a look at what's in the food standard already, what we expect a site to actually have in place or an auditor to be auditing. And then we'll have a look at some of the good practice that is available, ideas of things that could be useful within a culture plan, and some of the resources that are available to help sites develop a food safety culture plan. So there are a number of different definitions of culture available, but generally they apply to the shared values, attitudes, beliefs and practices that occur within a site. They can be either deliberately and consciously taught to staff, or they may be inadvertently learnt by staff because of the ways of working within that site, perhaps because of attitudes of current employees or because of the ways of working of management. This means that culture is very different from the formal processes and procedures that are put in place and documented within the site, because they are subjective and about how somebody interprets those requirements, those rules, or those procedures. And that can have an effect on how well they apply those within the factory setting. This is very important because it can have a massive effect on compliance with food safety activities and procedures, and therefore on the success of the procedures or processes that the site has in place. Whether, for example, individuals will follow procedures correctly, whether people will report things that they see that look wrong. And we'll have some more detail on those sort of ideas later in this presentation. So there is a long history of culture within the food standard. From that point of view, it's not entirely new. For example, as early as issue 5 of the standard, management commitment clauses were gathered into one place, into section 1 of the standard, so that there was a greater focus on those important activities that should be led by the management. A few years later, in issue 6, we added unannounced audits as an option within the scheme. An unannounced audit, of course, is designed to say that the site is confident enough that they're operating correctly, that they're happy to have the audit on any given day and not on a pre-planned day that they know in advance. And then, of course, within issue 8, we've added 2 items: the need for a culture plan, which is the main focus of today's presentation, and also the fact that the auditor will interview and discuss elements of food safety with the senior management during the course of the audit. It's also true to say that the standard has a number of artifacts of what a good culture might look like built within the requirements. Artifacts are sort of measurable outputs or objective outputs that can reflect or give an indication of the culture of the company. They're advantageous because they are objective measures, whereas culture is often seen as very difficult to measure because of the subjective nature of beliefs or attitudes. Therefore, some of the considerations that are already built into the requirements of the standard are things like the company product safety policy and the objectives, and the question about whether they are taken seriously, or whether they are meaningful, or whether they're just pieces of paper that are prepared specially for the audit. The provision of suitable resources, of course, is another measure of a food safety culture. Are they sufficient to do product safety the way it should be done? How a company responds to non-conformities and non-conforming products can also be very indicative of the culture of the company. How do they thoroughly do they process their root cause analysis, their corrective actions, and any resulting preventive actions, because they want to make sure that that non-conformity or that non-conforming product doesn't occur in future. And good training as a final example, because that takes time and effort. And again, the requirements within the standard about training. And it should again be noted that these are not the actual culture being measured, but they are indicators of what the company culture might be like. Food safety culture within issue 8 took a step change. It was recognised by the working group that was developing the standard that it was a fundamental factor within the management of product safety, and that there was a real need to increase the awareness of food safety culture within manufacturing sites, and therefore within the requirements of the standard. However, it was recognised, as we've mentioned, that actually objective measurement of the culture can be challenging, and therefore probably beyond the realms of a normal standard audit. But in order to develop that awareness and to develop that improvement, a clause was developed to raise the awareness and to start looking at the site having a plan that was objective and auditable. And so here is a copy of that requirement. It's clause 112 of the standard, again sitting there in section 1 with the other management commitment clauses. And it says that site senior management shall define and maintain a clear plan for development and continued improvement of a food safety and quality culture. It then sets a number of items that this should include, including defined activities involving all sections of the site that have an impact on product safety, an action plan indicating how the activities will be undertaken and measured, and timescales for those, and a review of the effectiveness of those completed activities. It should be noted, therefore, that the auditor will audit the plan and audit implementation of the plan rather than attempting to audit the individual cultures of a particular company. Schematically, I find it useful to just sort of tabulate that in a diagram which shows the whole culture plan and then just picks out those bullet points and asks some questions. Have you defined activities? What will be done? Have you implemented activities? Have you set timescales? Do you know how you'll measure them? Do you know how you'll assess the effectiveness of them? And so just for a few minutes, we're going to unpack those particular items and have a look in a bit more detail about how you go about defining activities and the like. So the first point, as I've just said, there must be a plan in place. That means there must be some sort of document. It's not acceptable for sites to be able to vaguely say, we're working on culture like this. There should be an actual documented plan. It should be specific to the site. The site will need to define its own priorities, its own starting point, and its strengths and weaknesses so that it can develop a relevant plan for that site. And all of that should be discussed and should be put into the plan, and obviously that will form part of the discussion that the auditor has with the senior management during the course of the audit. So there should be some defined activities within that plan. As I've said, we have not been prescriptive about what those activities will be because they should be site-specific, and we'll give some examples of ideas of what might form a good plan shortly. But it should be noted that those activities should consider all the departments where an effect on food safety could occur. So that's not just the technical team or the quality assurance team, not just the production line, but all of the staff that could have an effect on the product safety, because they're the ones that need to buy in to a product safety culture.
Thank you, John. Thank you for introducing this subject. I want now to look at how we might actually start to classify areas which we would consider when we're developing our plan for food safety culture. When people talk of culture or think about culture initially, it appears to be quite a woolly subject, difficult to really get your handle upon exactly what it is that we might want to be thinking about in terms of developing a plan to improve the culture within our businesses. There are, in fact, a couple of models which have been used to try and look at the aspects which form the culture of a business and which can be influenced to actually drive improvement or change in the culture. On this slide, we're presenting the approach which is taken in the BRCGS Culture Excellence product, which looks at 4 different categories and then subdivides those into different dimensions. The 4 main categories here you'll see are people, the processes, the purpose of the organisation, and the category around proactivity. GFSI have also produced a working document which again looks at different attributes of food safety culture and have divided it again into very similar types of work streams or categories, and their document I'll present to you a little bit later on. But for the sake of trying to get a bit of focus around the sorts of things that we should be thinking about as we develop culture within the business, I'm going to use these 4 categories as set out in this slide in the BRCGS product. So I want to look at now is the people category and some of the dimensions around people, which will help perhaps to make us think about what we might want to do in terms of our own businesses. So the first of these dimensions is empowerment. Clearly, it's very important if we want to have a proactive food safety culture within the business that our employees feel empowered, that we can actually feel we can trust our employees to make key decisions around food safety for us. So you have to ask yourself, do we believe our staff are empowered and are they able to act on an issue? If they see an issue occurring on the line, would they stop a line, for instance, if there was something happening which was going to produce product which was unsafe or lacking in quality? And more than that, how do we encourage empowerment within our business? Do we reward staff when they take the appropriate initiatives? Or is it frowned upon and seen that they must always go to a supervisor or a manager before doing anything? And in order to empower staff, they need to understand what good and bad looks like. So they need to understand what the expectations of the company is. They need the right training and they need the right knowledge to make those right decisions. So one area perhaps to look at and think about is, do we feel that our staff are actually sufficiently empowered? Do we trust them to make decisions and to act independently of us? And if that's not the case, then perhaps we should be thinking about how we improve the training of the staff, how we reward them in such a way that they are encouraged to make correct decisions, and have the right knowledge of what is expected. So there's some things we might think about around empowerment. Another aspect of people is the reward systems that we have in place. It's clearly very important that we are reinforcing the good behaviours that we want to encourage within our individuals, and potentially to be sanctioning behaviours which are detrimental to the culture or to the production of safe food. So maybe we need to look at, if we believe that our rewards and incentive systems are weak and are not really driving the behaviours that we're looking for, then maybe there's a project which is looking at how we actually deliver rewards. Do we want to introduce new reward systems, champions for this or champions for that? And when we're doing so, we need to think a little bit about what the rewards mean to individuals. Everybody is different. Some people are rewarded by status or kudos or like to be singled out and praised. For others, it may be that the reward is actually about more money. It may be about more time with the family. There are a number of different reward systems, each of which need to be thought about in the context of the individuals that are receiving rewards. But potentially, if we feel that this is a weak area within our business, maybe this is an attribute which we need to think about and put some sort of project or plan in place for. Another aspect or key aspect of people is teamworking. How well do we work both within teams in the business and between teams? If we've got a strong culture, then everybody is pulling together. There's a strong sense of teamwork and togetherness and the ability to actually affect change and to work to a common aim. If we believe that teamwork is actually a weak area of our business, then maybe what we will need to do in terms of our project planning is to look at how we might strengthen the teamwork. This may be through working in particular projects together. It could be just about social team building. But maybe this is an area which we feel is something which needs to be focused upon. Other attributes within the people section are training. Training is a key part of all organisations, and clearly it's absolutely essential if you want people to understand what it is their job is expected to do, and to be able to act in a way which is positive for the business. But maybe there's a need for us to look at how we train people and when we train people. Maybe we have a lot of training in place, but perhaps it's not effective. Perhaps the method that we're training, the way that we train things out, is not conducive to learning outcomes that we're looking for. Maybe we need to increase the training. Maybe we need to do more training of staff that may be coming to us on a temporary basis. So if we feel training is perhaps an area of weakness, then maybe we should look at having a project plan to develop the way and how which we actually train people and who we train and on what. So maybe that becomes a focus area for our project plan. Or perhaps it's around communication. To have a strong culture within the business, we need to have a really clear communication passage, both up and down the hierarchies within the business. Individuals should feel that they can openly speak to managers and suggest improvements or changes. And from a management point downwards, we need to make sure that the way we communicate with our staff helps all to understand exactly what it is that we're looking for. You know, is there effective systems for feeding back information up and down the organisation? Do we communicate in a way which everybody can contribute to? Often in modern food factories we have workers with many different nationalities and speaking many different languages. Do we need to communicate in a particular way? Do we need to be using more signage within our businesses rather than relying upon the written word in order to help with communication? So if we believe that communication is an issue within our business and needs to be improved, then there are a number of things which we could perhaps think about in terms of improving the way that we communicate and what we communicate within the business. Maybe that's a focus for our action plan. So another one of the categories in which we think about culture and in terms of our planning processes is around process. So to have an effective culture within the business, we need to have a very clear understanding from all around the controls and the way that we work, the way that things are documented and operate, how our supervisors and managers interact with each other. You know, and it may be that we feel that we aren't able to exercise the right amount of control, and perhaps, you know, as an action plan, we decide that introducing a greater level of coaching, management skills, perhaps for different levels within the business, would be of value in terms of managing and controlling the way that we operate within our business to give clear direction. Another thought is around systems. Commonly in the food industry, we tend to document most of our systems for food safety. But are they documented in a way which is clear for people to understand? Are they accessible to people? So do the staff actually have access to the information which they need through our documented systems to be able to work in a consistent manner? If that's not the case, we believe that's a weakness, then perhaps it's time for us to have a look at a review of our documented systems and see if we can make them more accessible and more understandable. Also within process, we think about the premises in which they're working. If we want to have a really strong and positive food safety culture within a business, it's important that people are working in an environment which reinforces that. If the conditions in which people are working and even facilities which we provide for them are inadequate, then it doesn't reinforce the message around the importance of food safety and quality within the business. And perhaps there's a need for us to actually be looking about some upgrade in things. Maybe it's the changing areas which need to be upgraded, or maybe we need to upgrade some of the facilities around the canteens or eating areas to instill a more positive attitude. Or maybe it's just about the fact we need to make some significant repairs or upgrading to the buildings to make people feel positive about the business and the attributes we're trying to achieve. Another category is classed as proactivity and risk assessment. In order for people to be able to make the right decisions, understand the context in which they're working, they need an awareness of risk. And that awareness of risk can be around food safety risks and within the business, both internally and to some extent externally. Do we believe that our workers really understand the risks around what we're doing and therefore are able to make decisions and act upon things in a particular way? Is there a need for us perhaps to do more training or coaching? So a classic example perhaps is around the area of allergens. Do we train people? Do our staff really understand the significance of certain allergens to the consumers who are going to buy our products? Is it understood on a personal level? Do they have experience of people who maybe suffer from nut allergies or dairy allergies or intolerance to gluten? Can we make that live for them so that they have an understanding of how very small quantities of such of these allergens may have a significant impact upon vulnerable individuals? So do they have that level of risk awareness? And if we believe that this is an area where we're not training out enough, then perhaps there's a program to try and raise the awareness of risks, both in terms of food safety within the business. Another key aspect of the culture within a business, particularly at more management levels, is around learning. Things happen. Mistakes happen. It's life. Things happen within our own factory. Things happen within our competitors' factories or in the wider environment. The important thing is, from a cultural perspective, do we learn from that? Do we understand the issues which have caused a particular issue or mistake to have happened? And are we able to, within our own organisation, learn from those mistakes and move forward? A strong culture within a business, or a business with a strong food safety culture, is constantly learning and improving. And if this is an area which we feel we're not particularly strong on, then maybe there are things we need to be doing about communicating issues and the learning from those issues and communicating that widely within the factory environment to help with that process of continual improvement and learning. Okay, so I've looked there at a number of attributes or categories or dimensions or areas that we may want to focus on when we're actually thinking about the plans that we want to put in place to improve the food safety culture. And I hope that gives you some ideas of those activities. So let's look again in detail at what the standard is actually asking for. So the standard, when you break it down, says the requirement says there shall be an action plan indicating how activities will be undertaken and measured and the intended timescales. So we've looked at a number of attributes there. There's a number of things that we could or may want to put in place. And the standard is basically saying to you, okay, so within your own business, within what you believe are the strengths and weaknesses of your business, what do you want to work on? What have you selected as the activities that you want to work on over the coming year? You need to clearly identify those activities or changes that you want to make in the site, and you need to document it in terms of a plan. But importantly, the plan needs to be realistic. Changing or improving the culture within a business is a long-term game. We can't expect to do everything in one particular year. Really, we should be concentrating on areas which we believe are most important to us, have a real focus, do a few things well rather than try and do a lot of things poorly. So, what we're looking for, and the auditor will be looking for when they come to the site, is that plan. What are the activities that you're planning to focus on in the coming year to drive culture? How have you documented it? Who is responsible for each activity or initiative that you've defined within your plan? So there needs to be some clear responsibilities defined in that plan so we can actually, somebody's held accountable for it. Probably that plan will need to look at a number of different activities or initiatives which will be delivered in phases through the year. You wouldn't expect to do everything at once. It will be about picking a particular attribute, saying, well, in this month we plan to do this particular activity with these particular group of people, and this person is responsible. In the third month of the year, we're planning to do this, which will enhance what we've done in the previous visit. Maybe in 6 months' time, the plan is to revisit and re-emphasize some of the things that we've identified and done earlier in the year, and then maybe in the 9th month of the year, we're planning to do this, which will again help to move forward this particular activity. So we need a plan which goes through the year, which identifies each of the actions we want to be doing, who is responsible for doing it. And we need also to introduce in there a review process, something so we can actually understand what is working and what isn't working. As we've done each of the activities, we probably need some sort of feedback or wash-up meeting, etc., to look at what has been done. So the auditor will be looking for that plan, they'll be looking for activities, they'll be looking to see who's responsible for each particular aspect, and looking to see how it's programmed out throughout the year. And finally, not the first year of your audit, but in the second year of the audit, once that plan has been enacted and fully implemented, it's obviously important then to review its effectiveness. Has it worked? Has it actually made some of the improvements that we're looking at? Or, in fact, is there some learnings from it? Have we done some things quite well, but there are other areas which have not been delivered in the way that we quite wanted? Or maybe we've had some unforeseen circumstances which have affected the outputs that we were expecting to get from this particular these particular activities. So what we'll be looking in the second year of the programme, and not in the first year obviously, is an assessment of what has worked and what hasn't worked. How are we going to use this evidence to actually improve the plans that we have for this next coming year in terms of the activities which we plan to develop the culture? And when we're considering this, sometimes it's useful to be able to think of ways in which we can actually measure the effects of the changes that we've made. And there are a number of different tools which can be used to actually measure the culture within a business and to help to provide some form of activity or some form of recognition of the progress which has been made or otherwise. I just want to take you through a couple of examples of the types of tools which could be used. I referenced earlier on the BRCGS Food Safety Culture Excellence module, and as I described to you earlier, this is where the particular people, process, purpose and proactivity activities come from. And this is certainly one item which is available to measure culture within businesses, and which may be of value to you as you move forward. This model works on the basis of employee surveys which are completed by your employees. The surveys are completed anonymously and fed directly into an offline portal, where all of the inputs from all of the employees are then evaluated, and you get a score based on those categories and dimensions. The score obviously is quite valuable in terms of understanding change, which happens year on year, to measure improvement, which you may find. It also provides some clues as to what the score means, how it compares to different organisations working in the same sector as yourselves. Obviously, not a particular organisation, but more general. And it's quite a valuable tool which can be used to actually drive improvement within your business, or at least be able to measure improvement. But as I say, there are a number of other tools which are available. Another very useful resource which you might want to think about is the GFSI document, which is freely available on the GFSI website. And that also looks at different categories and dimensions for measuring food safety culture. And again, this document, which is freely available, could be quite a useful reference point for you as well in terms of thinking about what characterises culture within the business and what sort of areas you might want to be thinking about working on in terms of developing your action plans. So I hope that's given you some sort of a clue as to how to progress with it. I'll hand back over now to John, who'll take you through some more aspects of the standard itself.
Thank you, David. Just really one last piece for us to think about. When we first started auditing issue 8, we did have a number of inquiries about what non-conformities against this clause would look like. And so we have put out a position statement which defines what a major and minor non-conformity would look like when relating to this specific clause. The definitions of a major and minor are exactly the same as they are for all the other clauses in the standard. In other words, a major is defined as a substantial failure to meet any requirements of the statement of intent or any clause. That means that if there's no product culture plan at all at a site, then that would be a substantial failure to meet the clause, and that would likely to result in a major non-conformity. If there is a plan in place, but some of the elements that we've been talking about today are not correctly in place or not well implemented, then that is likely to result in a minor non-conformity. But full details of that are available in the position statement, which is available on our website or on BRC Participate. So, in conclusion, there's been a fair piece of information there, and I hope you found it useful. But just in summary, culture is an important element of product safety because it builds on the processes and procedures, and it is important that sites look at methods for continuous development of that culture. Issue 8, therefore, has been designed to assess both the artifacts of good food culture and the objective requirements of a plan. But the standard itself, the auditor themselves, when they visit a site, isn't auditing the actual culture, but is looking at those artifacts and is looking at the plan and the implementation of them. The requirements have been built deliberately, flexibly, so that a site can decide what elements are really important for their site and develop them accordingly. And then there's that very important point related to that a site needs to be realistic. A few activities that are really core to their site will be a lot better if done well than attempting to do lots of stuff and not achieving it well, or picking on items that are not as immediately important as some of the others. So that's the summary. I hope you found today's webinar useful, and we will of course keep you up to date with future webinars. Thank you.